Welcome friends to the Secret Doctrine webinar. This is our third class and today we are going to start with Stanza 5. Stanza 5, as we are going to see, deals with a character in the occult cosmogony that is quite important. This character is Fohat. So let's see, as usual, we will start with a summary of the stanza that Blavatsky wrote. The title for the stanza is Fohat, the child of the Septenary Hierarchies. And she says, in stanza 5, the process of world formation is described. First, diffused cosmic matter. Then, the fiery whirlwind, the first stage in the formation of a nebula. That nebula condenses, and after passing through various transformations, forms a solar universe, or a planetary chain, or a single planet, as the case may be. So here she's describing briefly the process that we are going to explore. She describes it here from the physical point of view, but of course in the Secret Doctrine, she will also point out to the spiritual agencies and energies that are behind. And we see in the last sentence that this process described can be applied to the solar system as a whole, or to a planetary chain, which we will see today what that means, or to a single planet. So the first shloka in this stanza says, the primordial seven, the first 7 breaths of the dragon of wisdom, produce in their turn from their holy circumgerating breaths the fiery whirlwind. So we are familiar with the first characters, the primordial 7, and then the dragon of wisdom, we saw in our previous series, is one of the names or terms that are applied to the manifested logos, to the source of wisdom, order, intelligence in the system. So basically here we have 3 characters, the primordial 7, the dragon of wisdom, and then the fiery whirlwind, which we are going to explore. If we look at the diagram, remember we have said in previous classes that the primordial 7 are the first emanations from the logos, the dragon of wisdom in this case. And then from the primordial 7 come the fiery whirlwind. So this is how these 3 characters stand in relationship. Blavatsky explains in the commentary that this sentence vividly recalls to mind similar ones in the Kabbalah and in the phraseology of the King Psalmist, as both the Kabbalah and the Psalms, when speaking of God, show him making the wind his messenger and his ministers a flaming fire. So she points out that these 2 elements, the wind and the fire, are associated to the divine in other traditions too. Now in the Esoteric Doctrine, she says, it is used figuratively. The fiery wind is the incandescent cosmic dust which only follows magnetically as the iron filings follow the magnet, the directing thought of the creative forces. So she's applying this term to the physical aspect of the process of creation, this cosmic dust, this material, primordial material in the nebula that is going to form the planets or the solar system. And she says that the motion of this primordial matter, it follows magnetically the directing thought of the creative forces. So here we see a theme that we already explained in the previous stanza, This is why, before fully engaging in the description of the formation of a cosmos, the Book of Dzyan describes the creative and intelligent conscious powers that are these celestial beings, because matter follows, as we are going to see in this stanza 2, matter follows their will, their thought. So this is the difference between science and the esoteric view. From a scientific point of view, motion is normally regarded as something that happens randomly with no particular cause. And Blavatsky once and again in the Secret Doctrine, she asked, but what is the source of motion? Whether she's talking about planets or she's talking about anything else. She says motion is very important in science, but science has never been able to answer to what the source of motion is. For example, in a cell, the metabolism within a cell depends on the motion of the elements, proteins and the DNA and different elements that are used within the cell for the cell to be able to live and relate to the environment. And the proper functioning of a cell depends on very precise, a very precise chain of activity, which again, as I was saying, depends on motion. A protein coming here first, then another different one coming here, the two of them interacting, opening the way for a third one. Now, from the point of view of science, all this motion happens randomly. There is like a random motion in the cytoplasm of the cell, and the proteins just bounce off each other, and by chance they bounce with each other in the appropriate sequence, which is very difficult to accept as the truth. And statistically, if that were the case, no cell would be able to survive. But science has no way to talk about any direction behind the motion of the molecules in the cell. So this is where the esoteric philosophy comes in and says, behind every motion there is some kind of intelligence, whether of very high celestial beings or semi-intelligent elemental forces. But there is always intelligence behind. Now, even though Blavatsky is interpreting this from the point of view of the cosmic dust, from the physical point of view, she says, yet this cosmic dust is something more than merely matter. For every atom in the universe has the potentiality of self-consciousness in it, and is, like the monads of Leibniz was a philosopher, German philosopher, every atom is a universe in itself and for itself. It is an atom and an angel. Now, when Blavatsky is talking about the atoms, she's not talking about the atoms that are known by science. She always said, at the time, science thought that these particles that we call atoms were indivisible. That's what the word atom means. No, and tomos means division. So they thought that when they discovered the atoms, they thought that these were the ultimate particles that could not be divided. They didn't know anything about protons, neutrons, electrons, or anything even smaller than that at the time. So Blavatsky always contended this idea, and she says the atoms of science can be divided. So they are like molecules. The atoms in occultism are the true ultimate particles of each plane. So whenever you see atoms in the Secret Doctrine, in most cases, unless she says that she's talking about the atoms of science, in most cases she's talking about the ultimate particles that are available on each plane. And as she explains here, and then in the Secret Doctrine there is an essay about this, each atom has the potentiality for self-consciousness, and eventually in the process of evolution will become the center of consciousness that is in the atom in the process of evolution will become the center of consciousness of a human being or a celestial being. So from one of the main points that Blavatsky makes when talking about the Secret Doctrine is this view that all matter has intelligence and is alive, that no matter is blind or inert or dead. Of course, the intelligence of an atom is something that is very basic, that is nothing to do with the intelligence of a human being. And yet, there is an order behind, there is law in its action, there is a kind of intelligence. So then the second shloka describes the coming into play of this fiery whirlwind. It says they, which are the primordial seven, they make of him, of the fiery whirlwind, the messenger of their will. The Zu becomes Fohat, the swift son of the divine sons, whose sons are the Lipika. So this Fohat runs circular errands. He is the steed and the thought is the rider. And Blavatsky adds, he is under the influence of their guiding thought, of the primordial seven. He passes like lightning through the fiery clouds, the cosmic mists, takes 3 and 5 and 7 strides through the 7 regions above and the 7 below, the world to be. He lifts his voice and calls the innumerable sparks, the atoms, and joins them together. So there is an explanation in this shloka of general action of Fohat. So let's start little by little. They make of him the messenger of their will. Blavatsky explains this shows the primordial seven using for their Vahan, Fohat. Now she says the word Vahan means vehicle, or the manifested subject which becomes the symbol of the power directing it. So Fohat is the manifested action of the seven, the primordial seven, and that action, that Fohat, she says, is the symbol of the power that is behind. So maybe we could say that our actions are a symbol of the power that is behind, that is our thinking, our motivations, our intentions. So the what we do is a symbol of what we are. In this case, she takes Fohat as being a symbol of the wisdom of the divine seven, the primordial seven. And she says Fohat is called in consequence the messenger of their will, the fiery whirlwind. Then the next sentence says, the Zu becomes Fohat. He is the steed and the thought is the rider. So Blavatsky explains the Zu becomes Fohat. The expression itself shows the meaning. Zu is the only real magical knowledge or occult wisdom which, dealing with eternal truths and primal causes, becomes almost omnipotent when applied in the right direction. In this case, Zu is the expression of the collective wisdom of the Dhyani Buddhas. So this word Zu, wisdom, is obviously connected to the idea of Dzyan, the book of Dzyan, which is the book of wisdom, a wisdom that is acquired by meditation, as Blavatsky explains somewhere else in the Secret Doctrine. So the idea is the Zu becomes Fohat. The wisdom becomes this creative power. The wisdom of the primordial seven, now when they focus their attention on the beginning of this cosmic evolution, it becomes Fohat, becomes this creative power that will guide the formation of a universe, solar system, or a planet. This is not different from what happens with us. If from an esoteric point of view, all our thoughts, as we explained in the previous class, become a form, an energy, a certain kind of influence on the environment. So our knowledge becomes a power. If our knowledge is wise, if we have wisdom, then it becomes a beneficent power. If there is ignorance, then it may become a maleficent power. So the adepts, having reached or been in tune with the universal mind, they are doing something similar to what the primordial seven are doing, but they are doing it on their own plane, let's say. So the adepts are constantly producing evolving influences, spiritual influences, that can help the evolution of humanity. So their wisdom becomes a power, becomes a Fohat at the level of a human being. So in this case, Blavatsky says, Zu is the expression of the collective wisdom of the Dhyani Buddhas. Now, these Dhyani Buddhas it's another name for the primordial seven. And she says the question will surely be asked, do the occultists believe in all these builders, lipikas, the sons of light as real entities, or are they merely imageries? So when we talk about these celestial beings, are they real entities, or are they just a symbol for forces? And she says, to this the answer is given as plainly. After due allowance for the imagery of personified powers, we must admit the existence of these entities. So she means here, of course, we don't take this in the sense of thinking of them as personified powers. Normally in all religions, these celestial beings are depicted in a very human-like form, and they may have emotions and thoughts just like human beings. They have human bodies. So she says, keeping that aside, then not from that point of view, but from a subtler point of view, we must admit the existence of these entities. And then she says, if we would not reject the existence of the spiritual humanity within physical mankind. So she's saying, we see the physical human beings, which obviously to us are entities, are beings. Now, is there a spiritual entity behind the physical entity? Is there a spiritual source of being behind the physical being? So she says, if you believe that there is a spiritual source of being, a spiritual entity that is expressing itself through a physical form, in a similar way, we postulate that there is a celestial entity behind forces and laws of nature. The forces and laws of nature with the matter associated with them, as we said in the previous class, are like the physical bodies, cosmic bodies, of these celestial beings. And she says, for the hosts of these sons of light and the mind-born sons of the first manifested ray of the unknown all are the very root of spiritual man. So the sons of light, the manifested celestial beings, the mind-born sons, the emanations from the universal mind that we mentioned, which are all come from the unknown all, from the absolute. These hierarchies of beings are the very root of the spiritual man in us. So you see here she introduces again the idea that these hierarchies of celestial beings are not angels out there with little or no connection with us. Our being is rooted in them. Our spiritual being is an expression of these celestial beings. and our physical being is an expression of the spiritual being. So you have this chain, the hierarchies of beings, the spiritual in us, the physical in us, all a chain of expression from a single consciousness. So this is something that is important to keep in mind, because it's part of the worldview that the Secret Doctrine is trying to bring or to point out. We are all expressions of the one consciousness. We are not independent entities. We are consciousness within consciousness. And the physical being is an expression of the highest spiritual entities. And yet on each level, there is a sense of I-ness. There is a sense of I-ness that may not recognize the higher sense of I-ness. For example, the soul, when working through the body, thinks I am the body and forgets its own nature as a spiritual entity, as the soul. When the body dies, then the soul regains the awareness of its true nature, or during enlightenment. Now the soul itself, even though the soul has its own sense of individuality, again, the soul is part of the hierarchies. So at a certain point, the soul is able to regain the knowledge that it is part of these celestial beings. And these celestial beings also, although they have some sense of individuality, which Blavatsky says belongs to the whole hierarchy, and it's not individual in the sense that we know individuality, they also can realize that they are the one being expressing in the universe. Now, who are the Dhyani Buddhas? This word that Blavatsky is using here for the primordial seven. The word Dhyani Buddha is used in Buddhism, especially in Tibetan Buddhism. And in Tibetan Buddhism, it is said that there are 5 Dhyani Buddhas, and they are some kind of deities. Now, Blavatsky says esoterically, not from the point of view of Tibetan Buddhism, but esoterically, the Dhyani Buddhas are 7, of whom 5 only have hitherto manifested, and 2 are to come in the 6th and 7th root races. So in the esoteric view, the Dhyani Buddhas one by one manifest during each one of the evolutionary periods that humanity goes through, that we call root races. We are in the 5th evolutionary period, in the 5th root race, and at the beginning of each period, one of these Dhyani Buddhas manifests on earth to guide the evolution of that root race. Blavatsky, how do they manifest? Blavatsky explains they are, the Dhyani Buddhas, so to speak, the eternal prototypes of the Buddhas who appear on this earth, each of whom has his particular divine prototype. So the idea is that a human Buddha that appears on earth and teaches humanity is an expression, a manifestation of one of these Dhyani Buddhas. So again, there is this chain of consciousness by which human beings are the expression of celestial entities, celestial beings. So in Tibetan Buddhism, for example, they talk about 5 Dhyani Buddhas because only 5 Buddhas have manifested in the present cycle of human evolution. Of course, there were previous Buddhas and there will be more Buddhas in the future. But Blavatsky says there are actually 7 Dhyani Buddhas. There are 2 which are yet to be manifested through a human Buddha. Now going back to Fohat, because then these Dhyani Buddhas, the wisdom of these Dhyani Buddhas is expressed in the formation of the cosmos through Fohat. So Blavatsky says Fohat, being one of the most, if not the most important character in esoteric cosmogony, should be minutely described. He is the personified electric vital power. So you see here, these 3 words are meaningful. Fohat has to do with electricity, it has to do with vitality, and it is a power. So it is the personified electric vital power the transcendental binding unity of all cosmic energies. So from a certain point of view, Fohat is the synthesis of all cosmic energies. We discussed in our previous class that there are four, from the scientific point of view, there are four forces in nature, four fundamental forces in nature. They are coming to see that three of them are all manifestations of one force, the electromagnetic force. The fourth one, which is gravity, cannot be, scientists have a lot of troubles trying to understand gravity, for example, in terms of quantum physics. Blavatsky said gravity is not a force. Of course, there is an effect that we call gravity, but it's not because gravity is a force. So from Blavatsky's point of view, scientists are not going to be successful in quantized gravity because it is not a force. So the idea is that if science discovers this, then we will come to the scientific view that there is only one force in the universe, and that force is connected to electromagnetism. This is exactly what Blavatsky is saying here, and she's calling this Fohat. Electromagnetism is how Fohat manifests on the physical plane. She says Fohat is the origin of all cosmic energies. Any cosmic energy that force that you can think of can be traced back to this original, fundamental one force, which is Fohat. And she says, on the unseen as on the manifested planes. So all the energies on the manifested and also on the unmanifested planes. The action of which, of Fohat, resembles on an immense scale that of a living force created by will, in those phenomena where the seemingly subjective acts on the seemingly objective and propels it to action. So at the time, Blavatsky, in the previous years of her theosophical career, Blavatsky had performed many psychic phenomena by which she could precipitate, that means materialize, objects or plants or different objects around. And she explained that this can be done by the force of the will, by the willpower and the force of our thinking. She called it like in Hinduism, Icha Shakti, the willpower, and Kriya Shakti, the power of thought. And so she says Fohat is no different from this, although on a cosmic scale. So these Dhyani Buddhas, the primordial seven, are creating the universe by means of their willpower, their thought power. And that power is called Fohat. Now, the next sentence says, the swift son of the divine sons, this is Fohat, that is the son of the seven primordial, whose sons are the Lipika. Remember that we said in the previous class that the Lipika are the second seven, runs circular errands. So Fohat comes from the primordial seven, and it runs circular errands, and it is at the same level of the second seven. We are going to see that a little later. But here Fohat is connected to the idea of a circular motion. So Blavatsky explains, it is one of the fundamental dogmas of esoteric cosmogony that during the kalpas, or eons, or ages of life, during the ages of evolution, motion assumes an ever-growing tendency from the first awakening of cosmos to a new day, assumes an energy from the beginning to circular movement. So she says that it is a law that motion that begins by being chaotic at the beginning of the universe, little by little begins to assume a circular motion. They are called rotai, which is the root for rotation, the moving wheels of the celestial orbs participating in the world's creation, when the meaning refers to the animating principle of the stars and the planets. So the rotation of the planets and the stars, she says, is a manifestation of this law of circular motion. You see, you can see that the idea of rotation is essential in the cosmos. A moon rotates around a planet rotates around the sun rotates around the system of solar systems. That group of solar systems rotates around the galaxy, and presumably the galaxies also are rotating. So this circular movement is a law in the universe, and she says it is because this is how Fohat works. This law of vertical movement in primordial matter is one of the oldest conceptions of Greek philosophy, whose first historical sages were nearly all initiates of the mysteries. So she brings this to the idea of Greek philosophy and the pre-Socratics. I don't know if she's referring particularly to those that we call pre-Socratics, or maybe even more ancient philosophers, who she said they were initiates and they knew about this. So let us position these forces within the 7 planes of the manifested cosmos. So we have here, these are representation of the planes. Every time that we use this kind of graphics, we need to remind ourselves that the planes are not layers that are one on top of the other. So for example, we say Fohat is on the 4th plane. Does it mean that Fohat is not on the 3rd or is not on the 5th? That is not the meaning of this. Blavatsky explains Fohat is on the 4th plane, meaning that the state that we call the 4th plane, it has a Fohatic nature, has the nature of energy. Now, this nature of energy is in all the planes. So when we talk about planes, we are not talking about spatial dimensions. We are talking more about states of something that is all one and interpenetrating different states. We have a one being within which there are all these interpenetrating states, the 4th of which is Fohat, because it's the aspect of energy. As we are going to see, Fohat is connected in human beings with the 4th principle, which is Kama, which is the animal source and the animal soul, the source of vitality, energy, passion. So to come back to the graphic, the first 3 planes are Arupa planes, means formless planes, and they are divine planes of which we can know nothing. We just cannot conceive them at this point in evolution. These 3 are the planes where the logos manifests. Then on the 3rd plane, we have the first emanation of the manifested logos, which are the primordial 7. Now, after the primordial 7 come the second 7, the lipikas, which are important because we are going to see why. And it is on this plane that Fohat is at its best in a certain sense. As I said, the 4th plane is the plane of the creative energy, of a Fohatic quality. Now, it is necessary to introduce this for some things that the shlokas are going to talk about. On these 7 planes, the earth, the physical earth, is on the lowest. Now, in the Theosophical view, the physical earth belongs or is part of a system that is called a planetary chain, where there are 6 more globes associated to the earth. So these globes, Blavatsky puts them in this way. There are 2 globes on the next higher plane. There are 2 more on the next higher, and the 2 highest globes are on the 4th plane. So evolution, according to the esoteric philosophy, the human and animal, vegetable, mineral, and elemental evolution begins on the first globe, on the highest plane, which is of course not physical. And then it proceeds little by little, it goes down plane by plane until it comes to Earth, and then goes up again to non-physical planes. And this is called a round of evolution. After a round of evolution is over, there is a rest in a partial pralaya, in a partial period of rest, and then a second round of evolution begins, and this happens 7 times. Now the Lipikas, who are the lords of karma, are on the highest plane of the planetary chain because they are the ones that regulate the whole evolution of the system. So they, from the highest to the lowest plane, they are regulating how the karma that is propelling evolution. In the exoteric view, it is said that in Hinduism, for example, it is said that there are 4 Lipikas. In the esoteric view, there are 7 Lipikas, but the reason why, or one of the reasons why there are 4 Lipikas, is because they are on these 4 planes. So there are Lipikas on these 4 planes, and that is one of the reasons why there is mention only to 4 Lipikas. In the Bible also we see that there are 4 angels at each of the cardinal points recording the actions of humanity. So we will use these concepts in the previous slokas. The next sentence says, he, Fohat, passes like lightning through the fiery clouds, cosmic mists. So this is a visual image. We have the cosmic dust at the beginning, the nebula, and then there is like this kind of lightning going through the fiery clouds, and that lightning begins to set them in motion. Now it says, he takes 3 and 5 and 7 strides through the 7 regions above and the 7 below, the world to be. If we go back to this diagram, he takes 3 strides first. So this talks about the manifestation of Fohat at the level of the primordial 7. Then it takes 5, and then it takes 7. So this is a way of talking about the manifestation, the gradual manifestation of Fohat. Why those numbers? There is probably an esoteric reason why, but Blavatsky doesn't explain. And this would be the 7 above, and then on Earth itself there are 7 planes. So these 7 planes of the Earth would be the 7 below. So on a macrocosmic level, Fohat takes 7 strides, and then at the level of the Earth, Fohat takes these 7 strides. Now, Fohat, running along the 7 principles of Akasha. Akasha, remember, is the ultimate cosmic matter or cosmic substance, acts upon manifested substance or the one element as declared above, and by differentiated into various centers of energy, sets in motion the law of cosmic evolution, which, in obedience to the ideation of the universal mind, brings into existence all the various states of being in the manifested solar system. So Akasha is this one element which begins to differentiate into various centers of energy which begin to activate, to be set in motion by the cosmic law of evolution. And again, Blavatsky brings the idea of the universal mind. She says this cosmic law of evolution is following the universal mind. It's not a mechanical law that happens. And the 3 and 7 strides refer to the 7 spheres inhabited by men of the Esoteric Doctrine, as well as the 7 regions of the earth, which was what we just explained. Now the next one says, he lifts his voice and calls the innumerable sparks, atoms, and joins them together. The explanation that Blavatsky gives is, when the divine sun breaks forth, then Fohat becomes the propelling force, the active power, which causes the one to become 2 and 3 on the cosmic plane of manifestation. So the divine sun is the manifested logos in its first appearance on the highest cosmic plane. At this point, the one, the manifested one, is passive, as we saw in the first class in this series, and it is by means of Fohat that the one becomes the 2 and then the 3. So you see that Fohat is in operation before the primordial 7. But Blavatsky in some other places in the Secret Doctrine says that the Fohat that is on the unmanifested planes and on the highest manifested planes in some way is a little different from the manifested Fohat. But essentially, we don't know what that difference is. At some point, Blavatsky used the phrase Daivi Prakriti, which is found in the Bhagavad Gita, to refer to the more unmanifested aspect of Fohat. But we don't need to go into those complexities. But we can see here how Fohat is the propelling force that makes the 1 become the 2 and the 3 on the cosmic plane of manifestation. And then the triple 1 differentiates into many. And then Fohat is transformed. You see here that after the triple 1 emanates the first 7, the primordial 7, Fohat is transformed into that force which brings together the elemental atoms and makes them aggregate and combine. So the quality of Fohat previous to this primordial 7 Fohat is a force that produces this differentiation from the 1 to the 2 and the 3. Once the 3 is there and the primordial 7 are emanated, then Fohat becomes this force that begins to combine the elemental atoms, and remember, not the atoms of science, but the fundamental particles of each plane. Fohat brings them together and makes them combine to begin to form structures, subatomic particles, and the atoms of science and molecules and structures, more complex structures through which evolution of consciousness can take place. So Blavatsky goes on, in the phenomenal and cosmic world, Fohat is the occult electric vital power which, under the will of the creative logos, unites and brings together all forms, giving them the first impulse which becomes in time law. So here again a similar concept, and this idea that the first impulse that Fohat gives them in times becomes the law, how that motion, how that energy is going to work in the universe. And then Blavatsky says, it is present in the constructive power that carries out the plan in the mind of nature or in the divine thought. So Fohat is this creative power that manifests what is in the divine thought. In the first series, in the first class of the first series, we saw that there is the divine thought or the universal mind, in which the plan of the universe is, and then there is the cosmic matter, which can be molded by the universal mind. And Fohat is this creative power that impresses, that manifests, that brings into reality this plan that is in the universal mind and makes it material, not only physical material on the physical plane, but on every plane. So Fohat is this this power that stamps on matter what is in the divine thought. And she says, from the planetary system is the power that does this, from the planetary system down to the glowworm and simple deity. In his secondary aspect, Fohat is the solar energy and the preserving fourth principle, the animal soul of nature. And Blavatsky says in some of her writings that the energy that comes from the sun is like a cosmic kamic energy. Kama is the Sanskrit word for the fourth principle in human beings. And this is what she's saying here. The energy that comes from the sun, that is an expression of Fohat, is the fourth principle, or the animal soul of nature. Then on the earthly plane, she says, it is the electric vital fluid. His influence is felt in the magnetic and active force generated by the strong desire of the magnetizer. So she's referring here to, for example, mesmerism, that was quite prominent at that time, where the mesmerizer, it was a form of healing, where the mesmerizer, by means of his thought and will, could project this animal magnetism, as it was called at the time, and produce certain effects by means of that magnetism. So this fluid that they said that could emanate from our hands or the eyes or different parts, this fluid that is emanated by the mesmerist is an expression of Fohat at the level of a human being. So we can see different examples of what Fohat is. And then the last shloka that we will see today, he, Fohat, is their guiding spirit and leader. When he commences work, he separates the sparks of the lower kingdom, the mineral atoms, that float and thrill with joy in their radiant dwellings, the gaseous clouds, and forms therewith the germs of wheels. He places them in the 6 directions of space and one in the middle, the central wheel. So this, let us see what Blavatsky explains. Forms therewith the germs of the wheels. So the wheels, as already explained, Blavatsky says, are the centers of force around which primordial cosmic matter expands, and passing through all 6 stages of consolidation, becomes spheroidal and ends by being transformed into globes or spheres. So if we go back to the shloka, it says that first Fohat separates the sparks of the lower kingdom, and she says the mineral atoms. Now again, by this, she's not talking about the atoms of science, but those fundamental particles, which are also centers of consciousness, as we talked about, which are going to evolve by what we call the mineral kingdom. There is a mineral monad evolving through the mineral kingdom. So what Fohat does first is to take these particles that are an expression of the mineral monad, and with them forms the germs of the wheels. As we just saw, the wheels are the beginning, or the wheels eventually become the planets. So what Fohat does is first to create the germs that will in time become the planets. Now let us see a little more about these germs. There is a concept in the Secret Doctrine that is called Laya Center. Blavatsky explains in a later shloka, and stanza, but I'm bringing it here so that we can understand the idea of the germs of the wheels. Blavatsky explains there are 7 Laya centers, and these centers indicate a point at which, in esotericism, begins the differentiation of the elements which enter into the constitution of our solar system. So the Laya centers are these centers of ultimate primordial matter around which differentiation will take place. So the Laya centers are like the atomic matter of each plane, if we want to put it in that way, the ultimate particle of the homogeneous aspect of matter on each plane. And around this, but around is a symbolic way of speaking of this. So around this, matter will differentiate and begin more and more concrete, more and more dense, until we get to the physical matter. So in some ways, the Laya centers are the points which later on will develop into a planet or a solar system or whatever it is. And the shloka says that Fohat places these centers in the 6 directions of space and one in the middle, the central wheel. Blavatsky explains, by 6 directions of space is here meant the double triangle, the junction and blending together of pure spirit and matter, of the arupa and the rupa, of which the triangles are a symbol. So she's referring to this diagram in which we have each of the vertices of the double triangles would be the six directions of space, and then the central one, which is the synthesis of the 6, making 7. And the triangle, the darker triangle going down represents matter. The clear triangle going up represents spirit, because in evolution happens by bringing together these 2 principles, which are really not 2 different principles, but they seem so on the manifested planes. The principle of matter is in a process of becoming more and more dense, more and more concrete, and the principle of spirit is using that matter that is going downward, symbolically speaking, is using that matter to go up. The spirit is trying to, when the spirit is encased in matter, it is like isolated from the unity that is the reality behind the spirit, and now the spirit is trying to go up, symbolically speaking, to a perception of unity again through material vehicles that are in the process of coming down, coming to separation. So in the these 2 intertwined triangles talk about the friction between these 2 tendencies by which both spirit and matter evolve. So one of the way that Blavatsky interprets this sentence in the shloka here is by meaning that Fohat is behind this whole process, the evolution of spirit and matter. But there are other ways to interpret what these 6 directions of space are. The 6 and the one in the center, they may refer to the 7 planes. They may also refer to the 7 globes in the planetary chain. The central globe being the Earth, which is where the direction of evolution changes, is the turning point. So that would be the central wheel, and the other 3 to each side would be the other 6. So as we see repeatedly, the shlokas can be interpreted in different ways, and they are all equally right, in the right interpretations, because the universe follows these patterns. So this is what we have for this class, and in our next class we are going to finish with shloka 5.